In the shadowed vaults, where iron whispered secrets to the stone, a single drop of blood etched the boundary between captivity and chaos, forever blurring the line between savior and storm. Alara had always been a creature of twilight, born under a blood moon in the crumbling spires of Eldrath, a kingdom long fractured by wars that bled the earth dry. At 28, she carried the weight of her dual heritage like a chain forged in her mother's womb. A mortal father, a scholar of ancient tomes who perished in the priest's purges, and a vampire sire whose name was whispered only in curses. The Dhampir's skin was pale as moonlit marble, veined with the faint silver of her immortal blood, but her heart beat with the fragile rhythm of humanity, prone to fever and fracture. Trauma clung to her like mist. The night her village burned, accused of harboring the undead, the exile that left her scavenging ruins, her powers flickering like dying embers, always one step ahead of the iron-wielded faith that sought to erase her kind. She desired only solitude, a quiet corner of the world where her thirst for blood warred not with her soul, but perhaps, in fleeting dreams, a connection that might mend the rift within. The priests had come at dawn, their robes heavy with the scent of incense and sanctified oil, their chants echoing through the fog-shrouded halls of the grand citadel. They were the Order of the Eternal Flame, guardians of a fragile peace after centuries of vampire incursions that had painted the kingdom's borders in crimson. King Thorn, the immortal sovereign of the shadowed realms, had been their greatest foe. A vampire of ancient lineage, over 500 years old. His origins lost to the mists of a fallen empire where he once ruled as a warlord before the curse of eternity twisted his ambitions into isolation. Tall and gaunt, with eyes like polished obsidian reflecting forgotten battles, Thorn bore the scars of guilt, the lover he had turned in a moment of desperate love, only to watch her wither in madness. The wars he waged not for conquest, but survival, leaving him ethically adrift, a predator who hunted only the wicked, yet yearned for the absolution of mortality. His solitude was a throne of thorns, marked by the silver locket he wore, etched with a dried rose, symbol of a love that bloomed and decayed in eternal night. Alara remembered the ceiling as a symphony of agony. They had dragged her from the undercroft where she hid, her body already weakened by a lingering illness that gnawed at her bones like winter's bite. "Witch blood?" the high priest spat, his voice a rasp against the chill air, as they bound her wrists with iron manacles, cold and unyielding, sapping the magic that coursed through her veins. The metal hummed with enchanted runes, drawn from forbidden scrolls, sealing away her ability to summon shadows or bend the night to her will. She fought, her nails raking flesh, but the priests outnumbered her, their fervor a blinding light that seared her eyes. They believed her a harbinger of the vampire plague, a Dhampir spy sent by Thorn to unravel the kingdom's fragile truce. In truth, Alara sought no allegiance. She was adrift, disillusioned by a world that rejected her existence, her only desire to survive the fever that whispered of an early grave. Deep in the citadel's bowels, where torchlight flickered like hesitant breaths, they imprisoned her in a cell of wrought iron bars, the air thick with the metallic tang that cloyed her throat. Rain lashed the narrow window slits above, drumming a relentless tattoo against the stone, mingling with the distant rumble of thunder. Alara slumped against the damp wall, her breath shallow, each inhale a labored pull against the iron's curse. Her skin prickled with fever, sweat beading like dew on her brow, and in the dim glow of a single candle, its flame dancing in a draught, she traced the veins in her arms, pulsing faintly with suppressed power. The rose locket, stolen from a battlefield grave years ago, hung heavy at her throat. She didn't know its owner, but its withered petal inside felt like a talisman against oblivion, a reminder that even immortals mourned what was lost. Hours bled into night, the citadel's bells tolling midnight like a dirge. Alara's mind wandered to philosophical shadows. Was her half-life a redemption or a curse. The priests preached of light conquering darkness, yet their iron sealed not evil, but the very essence of choice, the ability to embrace one's shadowed soul. She had rationalized her isolation, building walls against connection, fearing the pull of her vampire blood that craved kinship with the undead. But in the fever's haze, memories surfaced. Whispers of King Thorn, not the monster of legends, but a figure haunted by ethical quandaries, sparing villages in secret, his wars born of a desperate bid to protect his kind from extinction. Love, she thought bitterly, was a fool's redemption. Inevitable, yet resisted. For what mortal could withstand eternity's weight? A sound pierced the monotony. Footsteps, soft and deliberate, echoing down the corridor like heartbeats in the void. Ilara tensed, her senses sharpening despite the iron's dulling grip. The candle's light stretched long shadows as a figure emerged from the gloom. Not a priest, but a man cloaked in midnight velvet, his presence filling the space with an aura of restrained power. Thorn. His face, angular and timeless, bore the texture of ancient sorrow, lines etched by centuries of loss. He paused at the bars, his obsidian eyes locking onto hers, and for a moment the air thickened with unspoken recognition, the locket at her throat glinting in the low light, its rose petal a mirror to the one he had buried long ago. "You wear a ghost's memory," he murmured, his voice a low timbre like wind through ruins, carrying the faint scent of earth and blood. Ilara's heart stuttered, a mix of defiance and inexplicable pull. She rose unsteadily, the iron biting into her skin, and met his gaze. In that instant, the boundaries of mortal and immortal blurred, a choice looming unspoken: resist the connection, or let it awaken the storm within. But as Thorn extended a hand, whispering words that stirred the air like a forbidden incantation, the ground trembled, a distant roar of battle cries echoing from the kingdom's borders. The priest's seal was cracking, not by her will, but by his, and with it, the fragile peace shattered, forcing Ilara to confront the Dhampir fire she had long suppressed. Would she aid the king who saw her soul, or let the iron claim her humanity forever? The tremor rippled through the stone like a vein pulsing beneath the earth's skin, carrying the distant clamor of steel on steel and voices raised in primal fury. Ilara's fingers tightened around the iron bars, the metal's chill seeping into her bones, amplifying the fever's insistent throb at her temples. Thorn's hand hovered in the shadowed space between them, his whisper hanging in the air, a fragment of an ancient tongue that tugged at the edges of her sealed magic, like wind coaxing embers from ash. His obsidian eyes held no command, only a quiet storm of recognition, as if the locket's withered rose had bridged centuries in a single glance. She recoiled, her breath catching in the damp confines of the cell, where the candle's flame bowed to an unseen draft, casting elongated shadows that danced like specters across the walls. Rain continued its mournful patter against the slits high above, mingling with the muffled roar from beyond the citadel. War, unbidden, clawing at the kingdom's frayed edges. "What have you done?" Ilara's voice emerged hoarse, laced with accusation, and an undercurrent of fear she could not name. Her body ached, the illness weaving through her like threads of frost, reminding her of the mortal fragility that her vampire blood both mocked and sustained. Thorn lowered his hand slowly, the velvet of his cloak whispering against the stone floor. He was a silhouette etched in moonlight, filtering through the cracks, his form tall and unyielding, yet marked by the subtle wear of isolation, shoulders that bore the invisible weight of empires lost. "I have done nothing but seek what was taken," he replied, his tone a velvet rumble, carrying the faint, metallic tang of old blood and rain-soaked earth. 5 centuries had honed his restraint. He had learned to temper the predator's hunger with the philosopher's doubt, questioning each night whether his immortality was a gift or a sentence. The wars he had waged were not for glory, but for the shadowed kin who huddled in ruins, persecuted by flames and iron. Guilt was his constant companion, born of choices that echoed in empty halls, turning a lover to save her, only to condemn her to endless night, sparing human villages at the cost of his own people's trust. Now, before this Dhampir, half his world, half forbidden, he felt the stir of something perilously close to hope, resisted as one resists the dawn. Alara's gaze flicked to the locket, its silver chain cool against her fevered skin. She had found it years ago amid the charred remnants of a battlefield, where the air still reeked of smoke and spilled life. The dried rose inside, brittle as forgotten vows, had become her anchor, a symbol of beauty's decay, mirroring her own fractured existence. "This is no heirloom of yours," she said, her words a shield against the inexplicable pull in his presence. Her heart, that treacherous mortal drum, quickened, rationalizing the connection as mere illusion born of delirium. Love, in her disillusioned mind, was a luxury for the whole, not for one abandoned by both worlds. Her father's scholarly tomes burned by zealots, her mother's undead whispers silenced in the purge. She had chosen solitude to survive, suppressing the thirst that clawed at her throat. The magic that could summon shadows, but now lay dormant, chained by the priest's runes. Yet Thorn's eyes lingered on the locket, a flicker of raw emotion crossing his timeless features, the pain of memory surfacing like blood from a fresh wound. "It was hers," he murmured, stepping closer to the bars, the air between them thickening with the scent of candle wax and unspoken grief. "Alawan, she chose eternity for me, in a garden where roses bloomed under starlight, but eternity devours the light it promises." His voice cracked faintly, a rarity for one who had outlived symphonies of sorrow. In that moment, the cell's confines felt intimate, the rain's rhythm syncing with their breaths, slow and deliberate, as if the world outside held its fury in deference. The ground shuddered again, closer now, dust sifting from the ceiling like fine ash. Shouts echoed down the corridors, priests' voices urgent and laced with panic. The seal they had wrought upon her was fracturing, not through brute force, but through this subtle incantation he had uttered, a ritual of resonance that called to the Dhampir essence she denied. Alara felt it stir within, a warmth uncoiling in her veins, silver threads of power pushing against the iron's bite. Her hands trembled as she clutched the bars, the metal warming under her touch, runes glowing faintly like veins of fire. Transformation beckoned, a choice veiled in shadow: embrace the magic, aid this immortal who saw beyond her broken shell, or cling to the humanity that doomed her to fever and fade. "Why me?" she demanded, her voice a whisper amid the growing tumult, eyes searching his for deceit. The candle sputtered, its light fracturing in the beads of sweat on her skin, illuminating the faint scars on her arms from nights of self-inflicted restraint against the bloodlust. Thorn's solitude mirrored her own, a king without a court, ethical in his predation, yet cursed by the loneliness of mercy. He had come not to conquer, but to confess, drawn by whispers of a Dhampir in the citadel's depths, one who bore his lost love's token. "Because you are the bridge," he said softly, his hand pressing against the bars opposite hers, close enough that she felt the cool aura of his skin. Mortal enough to feel the dawn's promise, immortal enough to defy the priest's chains. The kingdom bleeds because they fear what we could mend together. His words wove philosophy into the air, questioning the borders of life and eternity. Was redemption found in union, or did love merely amplify the curse? Ilara's resolve wavered, the fever blurring the line between resistance and surrender. The locket seemed heavier, its rose a silent witness to the inevitable. Outside, the battle cries swelled, iron clashing with shadow, the priest's light warring against the night. A revelation dawned in her core. This encounter was no accident, but a ritual of awakening, forcing her to choose: shatter the seal and liberate the magic that could free the realm, or let the iron consume her, preserving a fragile piece at the cost of her soul. As the first crack spiderwebbed across the cell door, a priest's scream pierced the din from the halls above, and Thorn's eyes met hers in silent plea. But in that heartbeat, Ilara glimpsed a deeper shadow in his gaze, not alliance, but the ghost of betrayal, a war within the vampire ranks that threatened to engulf them both. Would she unleash the storm or become its first casualty? The crack in the iron door widened like a vein splitting under pressure, releasing a hiss of suppressed magic that filled the cell with the acrid scent of scorched metal and blooming nightshade. Ilara's fingers, still gripping the bars, burned now, not with the priest's cold curse, but with the uncoiling fire of her heritage, silver threads surging through her blood like lightning in a storm-veiled sky. The fever that had gnawed at her bones receded in its wake, leaving a clarity sharp as shattered glass, forcing her to confront the choice etched in Thorn's gaze: shatter the seal and awaken the Dhampir storm within, or let the iron's embrace drag her into mortal oblivion. A quiet death amid the kingdom's unraveling wars. She pulled back, her breath ragged, the candle's flame leaping wildly as if feeding on the chaos. Rain hammered the stone slits above, a relentless dirge that drowned the priest's fading scream, but the echoes of battle grew louder. Clash of blades, guttural cries from the shadowed forces Thorn's incantation had unwittingly summoned. His hand remained pressed to the bars, cool and unyielding, the velvet of his cuff brushing the warming metal. In his obsidian eyes, she saw not just the plea of a king adrift in ethical tempests, but the flicker of a deeper fracture. Betrayal's shadow, born of whispers among his own kind, vampires who chafed at his mercy toward humans, plotting to seize the throne in this hour of vulnerability. "You hesitate," Thorn said, his voice a low cadence, resonant as thunder rolling through ancient vaults. He leaned closer, the air between them humming with the texture of restrained power, his immortal aura like cool mist against her fever-flushed skin. 5 centuries had taught him the solitude of command. Wars waged not for dominion, but to shield his fractured realm from the priest's purifying flames, each victory laced with the guilt of lives extinguished. He had spared human enclaves, rationalizing it as the philosopher's path to coexistence. Yet his kin saw weakness, their murmurs of uprising a poison seeping through the night. Now, facing this Dhampir, her pale form trembling yet defiant, he felt the inevitable pull of connection, resisted as one resists the siren's call, for love had cursed him once, turning Elowin's mortal light into eternal shadow. Ilara's hand drifted to the locket, its silver warm now, pulsing in time with the magic stirring in her veins. The dried rose inside, fragile as a whispered vow, seemed to unfurl in her mind's eye, a symbol of beauty's quiet decay, mirroring the kingdom's own ruination. Eldrith's borders bled from endless skirmishes, priests fortifying their citadels with iron wards while vampire clans raided in desperation, their immortality a hollow echo without purpose. She had fled such conflicts, her disillusionment a scar deeper than any blade. Abandoned by her father's scholarly world, rejected by her mother's undead legacy, her illness a constant reminder of mortality's cruel brevity. "This bridge you speak of," she replied, her tone laced with bitter philosophy, "it spans chasms that swallow the unwary. What if crossing it dooms us both? Your wars, your mercy, their chains as binding as this iron." The door groaned, runes fracturing like ice under a hammer's blow, shards of enchanted metal clattering to the floor in a shower of sparks. Thorn's incantation had been no crude spell, but a ritual of resonance, drawing on the locket's latent memory, the rose's essence tied to Elowin's turning, a forbidden union of blood and bloom. As the bars buckled, Ilara felt the full weight of revelation. Her theft of the locket years ago was no chance, but fate's subtle weave, binding her to this immortal's sorrow. Power flooded her, shadows coiling from the cell's corners like living ink, bending to her will for the first time since the sealing. She stepped forward, the iron manacles crumbling from her wrists, leaving red welts that throbbed with newfound vitality. The air thickened with the scent of earth and ozone, the candle extinguishing in a final, defiant sputter, plunging them into moonlight's silvery embrace, filtering through the rain-lashed slits. Outside, the citadel trembled as if the earth itself rebelled. Footsteps thundered down the corridor, priests armed with torches that cast flickering golden light, their chants a frantic bulwark against the encroaching dark. Thorn moved with predatory grace, positioning himself between Ilara and the approaching threat, his cloak swirling like wings of night. "Choose now," he urged, his voice intimate amid the din, carrying the weight of his solitude. "The seal breaks not just for you, but for the realm. My kin rise against the priests, but without your light, it becomes slaughter, not salvation." His words wove through her doubts, philosophical barbs questioning the essence of redemption. Could love mend the rift between life and eternity, or did it merely illuminate the shadows of betrayal? Ilara's heart pounded, a mortal rhythm clashing with the immortal surge in her blood. She rationalized the pull toward him as survival's illusion, yet it was inevitable, a tide eroding her walls. The locket burned against her chest, its rose a talisman urging transformation. With a breath that tasted of rain and resolve, she extended her hand, shadows weaving from her fingertips to envelop Thorn, amplifying his presence into a shield of night. Together, they faced the corridor as the first priest burst into view, his torch raised like a beacon of judgment, eyes widening at the sight of the liberated Dhampir and the vampire king side by side. The clash erupted in a blur of light and shadow. Ilara's magic lashing out, tendrils coiling around the priest's arm, extinguishing his flame with a sizzle of quenched fury. Thorn struck with restrained precision, disarming another without spilling blood, his ethical code a flickering light in the melee. But as they pressed forward, Ilara glimpsed through the fray a figure in the shadows beyond, a vampire scout, eyes gleaming with treachery, slipping away to report to dissident clans. Betrayal's whisper reached her ears amid the chaos, a plot to sacrifice Thorn for a purer night, using her awakening as the spark. They burst into the citadel's upper halls, where moonlight poured through arched windows like spilled silver, illuminating tapestries torn by recent skirmishes. Rain lashed the glass, drumming a warlike rhythm, while distant battle cries swelled from the kingdom's heart. Ilara paused, breathless, the fever's remnants aching in her limbs, forcing a moral crossroads. Aid Thorn fully, embracing the love that dawned in his protective glance, or flee into the night, preserving her fragile humanity against the wars that threatened to consume them all. Yet as Thorn turned to her, his hand brushing hers in a touch electric with unspoken promise, an arrow whistled from the gloom, fletched with iron, aimed not at him, but at her heart. The world slowed, the choice crystallizing in that suspended breath. Dodge and fight, or let it pierce, testing if eternity's mercy could redeem even this Dhampir's shadowed soul. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these immortal confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The arrow sliced through the moonlit hall like a shard of midnight judgment, its iron tip humming with the priest's lingering curse, aimed true for the fragile beat in Ilara's chest. Time fractured in that instant, the world a tapestry of silver light and lashing rain against the arched windows, where tapestries fluttered like wounded ghosts. She twisted, instinct born of shadowed survival guiding her body, the shaft embedding in the stone wall behind her with a resonant crack that echoed her pounding heart. Splinters of rock rained down, dusting her shoulders like fallen stars, and the air filled with the sharp tang of scorched iron mingling with the earthy musk of Thorn's proximity. He moved like liquid night, his form a blur as he seized the archer's arm from the gloom. A dissident vampire, fangs bared in treacherous gleam. His eyes not the obsidian depth of loyalty, but a feral crimson laced with ambition. Thorn's grip was ironclad, centuries of restrained power coiling without mercy, twisting the bow from the traitor's hand before hurling him against the far wall. The impact reverberated through the hall, bones cracking like dry branches under winter's heel. But Thorn spared the killing blow, his ethical compass a flickering lantern in the storm of betrayal. "Why?" he demanded, voice a low thunder that cut through the din, his face a mask of sorrowful accusation. The vampire scout gasped, blood bubbling at his lips, whispering of clans that plotted in the underrealms, vampires weary of Thorn's mercy, seeing the Dhampir's awakening as the perfect fracture to shatter his rule and unleash a purer, unyielding night upon Eldrath. Elara staggered back, her hand pressed to her side where the arrow's wind had grazed, a shallow burn that throbbed with the echo of what might have been. The magic surged within her now, unbound and wild, shadows weaving from her fingertips like silken threads, tasting the air with a cool electric bite. Yet the fever's remnants lingered, a mortal anchor pulling at her limbs, reminding her of the fragility she both cherished and despised. She watched Thorn, his silhouette framed by the window's silvery pour, rain tracing rivulets down the glass like tears on ancient marble. His solitude was palpable, a king adrift in a sea of his own making, wars fought for coexistence, now poisoned by the very kin he sought to protect. Guilt etched his features deeper, the locket at her throat seeming to pulse in sympathy, its dried rose a silent arbiter between them. The hall erupted into chaos as more figures spilled from the corridors. Priests with torches aloft, their chants a frantic weave of light and incantation, clashing against the encroaching vampire vanguard that poured through breached gates. Blades sang in the air, steel kissing shadow, while the scent of blood, hot and coppery, began to stain the velvet tapestries. Ilara's breath came in shallow pulls, the philosophical weight of the moment pressing like a crown of thorns. Was this liberation a ritual of redemption, or merely the prelude to greater ruin? She had rationalized her resistance to Thorn's pull, building walls against the inevitable tide of connection, fearing it would drown her humanity in eternity's depths. Yet here, amid the fray, his protective glance ignited something deeper, a love resisted yet blooming like nightshade in cracked earth, promising transformation even as it whispered of curse. Thorn turned to her, his hand extending once more, calloused from battles long faded, offering not command, but partnership. "The ritual is yours to complete," he said, his timbre intimate against the roar, carrying the faint, lingering aroma of rain-soaked stone and ancient vows. The seal on the citadel's heart, deep in the sanctum, holds the priest's final ward. Break it with your blood and shadow, and the kingdom breathes free. But choose swiftly. My kin's betrayal spreads like ink in water. His eyes held the weight of his traumas. The lover turned in desperation, her madness a scar that eternity could not heal, the ethical wars that left him solitary, a philosopher king questioning if mercy was folly in a world of endless night. Every immortal he knew was once someone who chose not to die. Yet in Ilara he saw the bridge to mortality's light, a Dhampir whose half-life mirrored his fractured soul. She nodded, the decision crystallizing amid the tumult, a revelation that pierced her core like moonlight through fog. The locket warmed against her skin, its rose unfurling in her mind's shadowed garden, a symbol of decayed beauty reborn in choice. With a murmured incantation drawn from her suppressed heritage, Ilara summoned the shadows, coiling them around Thorn like a cloak of living night, shielding him from a priest's hurled vial of holy oil that shattered harmlessly against the dark. Together, they pressed through the melee, her magic parting the fray like mist before dawn, tendrils lashing out to disarm without death, echoing Thorn's restrained ethic. The air hummed with texture, the slick slide of rain on stone, the velvet hush of shadows swallowing cries, the distant thunder of the kingdom's borders where wars raged unchecked. They descended into the citadel's underbelly. Spiral stairs worn smooth by centuries of footsteps, torches guttering in drafts that carried the metallic whisper of iron wards. Ilara's illness flared briefly, a cough racking her frame, blood flecking her lips, mortal frailty asserting itself even as power coursed through her veins. Thorn steadied her with a touch light as moonlight, his cool palm against her arm sending a shiver of intimacy through the gloom. "You are not alone in this fracture," he murmured, his voice a balm against the philosophical storm in her mind. Love, she realized, was no immediate blaze, but a slow burn, inevitable as the tide, redeeming through shared suffering. The priest's seal had aimed to erase her kind, but in this union, it forged something transcendent, light woven into shadow, life defying eternity's chill. The sanctum loomed at the stair's end, a vaulted chamber where a massive iron heart pulsed with enchanted runes, its surface etched with flames that flickered like dying embers. Candelabros lined the walls, their golden light casting long, wavering shadows that danced across frescoes of ancient purges. Rain's muffled drum echoed from above, syncing with Ilara's heartbeat as she approached, the air thick with incense and the faint underlying rot of suppressed magic. Thorn guarded the entrance, his form a sentinel against the encroaching sounds of pursuit. Priests' chants swelling, vampire traders' hisses slithering through the stone. Kneeling before the seal, Ilara drew a dagger from her boot, its blade nicked from scavenged ruins, and pricked her palm, blood welling dark and silver-veined. She pressed it to the iron, whispering the conjuro her mother's whispers had etched into her soul. Words of night and bloom, shadow and thorn. The metal groaned, runes fracturing like veins under strain, releasing a gust of pent-up power that filled the chamber with the scent of night-blooming jasmine and fresh earth. Cracks spider-webbed outward, the heart of the seal shattering in a cascade of sparks and dust, unleashing waves of unbound magic that rippled through the citadel like a sigh from the depths. The kingdom stirred in response, distant tremors easing, the air lightening as wards crumbled across Eldrath. Ilara rose, weakened yet transformed, the fever's grip loosening in the wake of her choice. Thorn's gaze met hers, raw with unspoken gratitude, the locket bridging their silences like a thread of fate. But as victory's echo faded, a shadow detached from the sanctum's edge, not priest or traitor, but a figure cloaked in familiar velvet, a vampire emissary from Thorn's own court, eyes gleaming with the promise of deeper conspiracy. "The Dhampir lives," the intruder hissed, vanishing into the gloom before Thorn could strike, leaving words that chilled the air. "But the Queen's return demands a sacrifice neither of you can refuse." Ilara's hand found Thorn's in the dimming light. The touch a vow amid the ruins, yet the whisper of betrayal lingered, forcing a new dilemma. Pursue the shadows of his fractured realm, or flee into the night, their budding redemption tested by the ghosts of thrones and lost loves. Subscribe if you believe shadows can mend a kingdom's fractured heart. The sanctum's air hung heavy with the aftermath of rupture, shards of iron scattered like the brittle bones of forgotten oaths, their edges glinting in the faltering glow of the candelabros. Ilara's blood still smeared the fractured seal, a dark sigil cooling against her palm, its silver veins receding like tides from a storm-lashed shore. The kingdom's pulse steadied beyond the stone, Eldrath exhaling as wards dissolved, the night air lightening with the faint, elusive scent of thawing earth and distant pine. Yet victory tasted of ash on her tongue, the emissary's hiss lingering like venom in the shadows. The Queen's return, a sacrifice unspoken. Thorn's hand tightened around hers, cool and unyielding as polished marble, anchoring her against the sway of revelation. His touch, electric with restraint, stirred the inevitable tide she had long resisted, a connection that promised redemption's fragile bloom even as it whispered of curses woven in eternity's loom. She pulled away gently, her breath a shallow rhythm syncing with the rain's persistent murmur against the vaulted ceiling, where droplets seeped through cracks like tears from the heavens. The fever's echo throbbed in her temples, a mortal reminder that her liberation came at the cost of deeper entanglement. "Who is she?" Alara asked, her voice a thread of silk amid the chamber's hush, eyes searching his obsidian depths for truth unvarnished by centuries of guarded sorrow. The locket at her throat warmed, its dried rose pressing like a thorn against her skin, symbol of love's decayed yet enduring, mirroring the fracture now widening between them. Thorn's silhouette loomed against the flickering flames, his velvet cloak pooling shadows at his feet, the weight of his immortality etched in the subtle tension of his jaw. 500 years had sculpted him into a philosopher of the night, wars waged not for conquest, but ethical survival, sparing the innocent amid the fray, only to earn the disdain of his own shadowed kin. Guilt was his eternal companion, born of Eloin's turning, a desperate act of love in a rose-choked garden, her humanity sacrificed to the curse, leaving him solitary in halls that echoed with her fading laughter. He had rationalized isolation as mercy, resisting bonds that might shatter again, yet Alara's presence unraveled that veil, her Dhampir essence a bridge he dared not cross lightly. "Ilawan," he murmured, the name a low timbre like wind sighing through ruins, carrying the faint, coppery undertone of old blood. Not returned as flesh, but as memory weaponized, the clan's whisper of a ritual to summon her shade, my queen, unbound, to claim the throne through blood debt. They see you as the key, Dhampir, your half-life, the sacrifice to fuel her resurrection. The words coiled in the air, philosophical barbs piercing the intimacy of the moment. Alara stepped back, shadows from her unbound magic trailing her like loyal specters, their cool texture brushing her arms like velvet night. She had always been adrift, broken by the blaze that claimed her village, her father's tomes reduced to cinders, her mother's undead whispers silenced in the priest's iron grip. Illness had been her constant shadow, fever gnawing at the edges of her resolve, disillusioning her to any light beyond survival. Yet here, in Thorn's gaze, raw with the vulnerability of one who had chosen eternity over death, she glimpsed a redemption not solitary, but shared. Love, she realized, was no swift inferno, but a slow unraveling, inevitable as the moon's pull, transforming suffering into something transcendent. The kingdom's wars, political machinations twisting like thorns around the throne, now demanded her choice: aid him in mending the fracture, or retreat into the solitude that had preserved her fragile humanity. Footsteps echoed from the spiral stairs above, a cadence of urgency. Vampire scouts loyal to Thorn, their cloaks whispering against stone, eyes gleaming with the fervor of the redeemed. One knelt before him, breath ragged, the scent of rain and fresh spilled blood clinging to his form. "The borders hold, my king," he reported, voice a gravelly hush amid the sanctum's resonant hush. Priests retreat to their inner flames, but the dissidents rally in the undercroft. They chant for the queen's veil to tear, your locket's rose as the anchor. Thorn's expression darkened, a storm brewing in his timeless features, the ethical dilemma carving deeper lines. Confront the betrayal and risk the slaughter of his kin, or let the ritual unfold, dooming the fragile peace he had bled for across centuries. Alara's heart quickened, the mortal beat clashing with the silver surge in her veins as she traced the locket's chain. The dried rose inside, brittle yet potent, felt alive now, a talisman urging her forward. With a nod born of quiet resolve, She summoned her shadows once more, weaving them into tendrils that slithered up the walls like living ink, illuminating hidden passages etched in the stone. "Lead us," she said to the scout, her tone laced with the poise of one embracing transformation. Thorn's hand brushed hers again, a fleeting touch that sent shivers through the gloom, intimate as a shared breath in candlelit confession. They moved as one, descending into the citadel's labyrinthine depths, where torchlight flickered like hesitant stars against walls veined with quartz that caught the moonlight in fractured prisms. The undercroft unfolded like a cathedral of forgotten night, arches soaring into blackness, the air thick with the musk of damp earth and smoldering incense from priests' abandoned rites. Rain's distant drum filtered through fissures, syncing with the low chants rising from the chamber's heart. Vampire voices in dissonant harmony, invoking Eloan's shade with words that twisted the air like smoke. Thorn paused at the threshold, his form a sentinel of restrained fury, while Ilara's magic pulsed, shadows coiling protectively around them. The scene before them was a ritual of shadowed grandeur. Dissident vampires circled a central altar of obsidian, etched with runes that glowed crimson, the air humming with the texture of unraveling veils. At its core lay a mirror of polished silver, reflecting not faces but glimpses of a garden under blood moon. Roses blooming eternal, Eloan's form flickering like a ghost in the glass. Betrayal's face emerged from the circle, a lithe vampire elder. Eyes burning with political ambition, her fangs glinting as she raised a chalice brimming with dark elixir. "The Dhampir comes," she intoned, voice a silken venom that cut through the chants. "Her blood, mingled with the king's token, will tear the veil." Eloan rises, and Thorn falls, for a realm untainted by mercy. The words ignited the chamber, shadows clashing with conjured flames as the dissidents turned, blades drawn in a symphony of steel and hiss. Thorn surged forward, his movements a dance of lethal grace, disarming foes with blows that felled without fatality, his ethic a light piercing the fray. Ilara wove beside him, her shadows lashing out like whips of night, quenching flames and binding limbs. The magic's cool rush mingling with the heat of exertion. Blood scented the air, spilled but not lethal, coppery warmth on her skin. Yet the elder evaded, chalice raised toward the mirror. In a heartbeat of suspended chaos, Ilara glimpsed the reflection's depth. Eloan's eyes, sorrowful and knowing, locking onto hers, whispering a choice veiled in memory. The locket burned, rose unfurling in phantom bloom, forcing Ilara to confront the heart of the curse, sacrifice the token to shatter the ritual, or let it bind them all in eternity's tragic weave. As Thorn reached for the elder, a blade flashed from the gloom, aimed at his unguarded back, the dissident's treachery culminating in a strike that promised to unmake the king before the queen could claim her due. Ilara's cry tore through the din, shadows erupting in desperate fury, but the edge hovered, fate teetering on the precipice of loss. Like if eternity's thorns can bloom into mercy's fragile rose. The blade's edge caught the undercroft's crimson glow, a sliver of silver death poised inches from Thorn's spine, the dissident's arm trembling with the fervor of betrayal. Ilara's cry shattered the chants, a raw sound woven from mortal fear and immortal fury, her shadows exploding outward like a tempest of ink and storm. They coiled around the attacker's wrist, twisting with unyielding force, the cool silk of night wrapping bone and sinew until the blade clattered to the obsidian floor, ringing like a fractured vow. The vampire howled, fangs bared in agony, but Ilara's magic held without mercy's fracture, binding, not breaking, echoing the ethical restraint she had glimpsed in Thorn's wars. Rain's muffled thunder rolled from above, sinking with her ragged breaths, the air thick with the metallic bite of spilled blood and the smoky veil of unraveling incantations. Thorn whirled, his obsidian eyes flashing with the shock of near loss, centuries of guarded solitude cracking in that gaze. He seized the traitor's throat, lifting him effortlessly against the arched wall where quartz veins pulsed like frozen lightning. But his grip loosened before the fatal crush. Guilt's shadow staying his hand, a philosopher's doubt questioning if even betrayers deserved eternity's end. The undercroft pulsed with chaos. Dissident vampires lunged from the ritual circle, their forms blurred shadows against the altar's glow, blades whistling through the air scented with incense and desperation. The mirror at the center rippled like disturbed water, Eloan's spectral form deepening. Her eyes, haunted mirrors of Thorn's own sorrow, reaching across the veil with silent plea. The chalice trembled in the elder's grasp. Dark elixir sloshing like liquid night, its surface reflecting the dried rose's phantom bloom. Ilara pressed forward, her body a conduit of transformation, the fever's remnants fading into a distant ache as power surged through her veins, silver and vital, tasting of earth and midnight dew. She had resisted this awakening, rationalizing the pull toward Thorn as delirium's lie, a connection that would curse her fragile half-life with eternity's weight. Yet here, amid the clash of steel on shadow, love unfurled inevitable as roots through stone. Not a blaze, but a quiet redemption, mending the fractures of abandonment and guilt. Her village's ashes, her father's burned tomes, her mother's silenced whispers. They dissolved in this shared storm, replaced by the texture of his presence, cool and anchoring, like velvet against fevered skin. The elder vampire sneered from the altar's edge, her lithe form coiling like smoke, eyes burning with political venom. "The queen demands her due," she hissed, voice a silken rasp that cut through the fray, raising the chalice high. Crimson runes flared brighter, drawing on the locket's latent essence. Eloan's memory twisted into a weapon, the rose's decay fueling the veil's tear. Thorn broke free from the bound traitor, surging toward her with predatory grace, his cloak swirling shadows that quenched conjured flames licking at his heels. Ilara wove beside him, her tendrils lashing out to ensnare the elder's ankles, pulling her off balance amid the obsidian's gleam. The chalice tipped, elixir spilling in dark rivulets that steamed against the stone, filling the air with the acrid tang of forbidden alchemy. But the mirror cracked then, a spiderweb fracture blooming from its core, Eloan's image fracturing into shards of sorrowful light. Whispers emanated from the glass, not chants, but echoes of a garden long lost, petals falling eternal, laughter fading into night. Thorn faltered, his hand hovering inches from the elder, the weight of revelation crashing like waves on jagged shores. "She chose not to die for this," he murmured, voice a low timbre laced with philosophical anguish, eyes locked on the spectral gaze. 500 years of ethical isolation bore down, the wars he had waged for coexistence, sparing humans and kin alike, now poisoned by this ritual's perversion. Guilt clawed deeper. Eloan's turning had been his desperate love, a bid to defy mortality, yet it had birthed madness, her shade now a pawn in the clan's treacherous bid for a merciless throne. Ilara reached the altar first, her palm slamming against the mirror's surface, shadows flooding the cracks like healing balm. The locket burned at her throat, its chain a tether pulling her into the depths, visions assaulting her. Thorn in that starlit garden, Eloan's mortal hand in his, blood shared in vow and curse. The dried rose inside unfurled in her mind, not decayed but vibrant, a symbol of beauty's resilient thorn. She poured her essence into the glass, blood from her earlier wound mingling with the shadows, a counter-ritual born of Dhampir intuition. The elder lunged, nails raking Ilara's arm in a blaze of pain that drew crimson beads, hot and textured against the cool magic. Yet Ilara held, the mirror shuddering as Eloan's form solidified. Not vengeful queen, but a whisper of forgiveness. Her eyes softening on Thorn before dissolving into motes of silver light that scattered like snow in the Undercroft's draft. The dissidents faltered, their chants breaking into cries of dismay, the rituals unraveling, sapping their fervor. Thorn dispatched the elder with a precise strike to subdue, not slay, her form crumpling amid the obsidian shards, bound by shadows that Ilara willed into chains of night. The chamber fell into hushed aftermath, breaths ragged amid the fading incense, rain's rhythm the only constant, drumming like a heartbeat reclaimed. Thorn turned to Ilara, his hand cupping her wounded arm, cool touch staunching the flow with gentle pressure, intimacy blooming in the silence. "You mended what I broke," he said softly, voice resonant with the vulnerability of one who had long resisted connection, his obsidian eyes reflecting her transformed gaze, mortal warmth laced with eternal depth. She leaned into him, the pull no longer resisted but embraced, a love that redeemed through shared shadows, transforming curse into choice. The kingdom's wars paused in the distance, political thorns yielding to this fragile peace, yet the emissary's earlier words lingered, a deeper conspiracy, clans fractured beyond this chamber, demanding vigilance. Ilara's heart, that mortal drum, synced with his stillness, philosophical clarity dawning. Every immortal was once someone who chose not to die, and in her, Thorn glimpsed mortality's light anew. But as the silver motes settled, forming a faint outline on the altar, a new rose, fresh and thorned, pulsing with unbound magic, a shadow stirred in the chamber's far arch. Not dissident, but priest, cloaked in lingering incense, eyes wide with zealous fire, a hidden vial of iron elixir raised in trembling hand. The choice loomed once more: confront the encroaching light of old faiths, or let the shadows claim them both in eternity's tender, treacherous embrace, testing if redemption could withstand the dawn's unyielding judgment. If this story has already captured you, leave a like. It helps the voices of those who chose eternity reach more hearts.